Hello, Year 7. This is our second lesson in the topic of percentages. And what we're going to be looking at today is how you can use a calculator to work out percentages. So for all of the work that we do today, you are going to need your calculator. So if you need to pause the video, go and find your calculator. It might be at the bottom of your bag. Can you go and do so, please? If you don't have access to a calculator, do remember there are things like a calculator app on a phone, so you could possibly use your phone if you cannot find a calculator. Now, what's really interesting about percentages and calculators is there is many different ways that you can do this. And I'm going to be showing you 3 different ways that you can work out percentages using your calculator today. And one thing that I will not be teaching you at all is how you actually use the percentage button on your calculator. Now on my calculator, you might see that just above the 1 in bright orange is the percentage symbol from last lesson. Okay? Now the reason why I'm not showing you how that button works is because it might be different on your calculator. Not everybody's calculator works in the same way. And also, I don't think that button actually helps you understand how percentages work. Okay? So I'm going to be showing you 3 different ways that do not involve that percentage button. Okay, so let's imagine we had a question like, work out 28% of 35 metres. Now, if you didn't have a calculator, you would have to do this in the exact same way that we were doing our percentages in the last lesson. So you'd need to think about which building blocks you could use to build up to 28%. Okay? Now, there is one of those building blocks that I think is the most important building block. And that is the 1% building block. Because if you think about it, with 1%, you could build up practically any percentage you wanted. If you wanted 8%, you could do 1% 8 times. If you wanted 12%, you could do 1% 12 times. So the first method that we're going to talk about is what I'm going to call the 1% method. And I think this method links most closely to what we were doing last lesson. So I'm just going to put a little subtitle, the 1% method. Okay, and I'll just underline it. So you might recall from last lesson, if you wanted to find 1% of a number, you took that number and divided it by 100. So if I wanted to find 1% of 35 metres, I would have to do 35 divided by 100. That would work me out 1%. But if I needed then 28 of those, I would need to times it by 28. And that is exactly what I'm going to type into my calculator. You can either do 35 divided by 100, press equals, and then times that answer by 28. I got the answer 9.8. On a scientific calculator, you should be able to type that all in one go. Equals 9.8. And since that was in metres, my answer would be in metres. Okay, let's look at another question using the 1% method. So this time I'm going to pick 9% of, let's have 120 grams. So the same idea, 9% of 120 grams. Well, if I wanted 1%, I would divide my quantity by 100. And then I need to multiply by the percentage that I need, which is 9. So again, I'll go to my calculator 120 divided by 100 times 9, and that is 10.8 grams. Now, since this number's really nice, okay, there's absolutely no point rounding it. I'm going to write my exact calculator display down. Okay, now that is just one way of doing these questions. Okay, I'm now going to show you a second way, but I'm going to use the same two questions again to show you that we get the exact same answers with a slightly different method. Okay, now one thing that I said last lesson is a percentage is a number out of 100. So for example, 28% is 28 out of 100, and 28 out of 100 is a fraction. So the next method that I'm just going to show you is something that I'm going to call the fraction method. And what this involves is turning your percentages into fractions first. So if I'm doing the exact same two questions again, well, 28% is 28 out of 100. Okay, the word of in maths means multiply. So I'm doing 28 out of 100 times 35. Now again, there's several ways you could write this into your calculator. If you already know how to use your fraction button, you could write that as a fraction. Okay, alternatively, this line in a fraction means divide, so I could key in 28 divided by 100 times 35. So I'm going to type 28 divided by 100 times 35 equals, and once again I've got the exact same answer of 9.8. So if I was going to use the fraction method for this question, what do you think I should be writing into my calculator? Well, 9%, well that's 9 out of 100. And then times my quantity, which was 120. And if we do that, just quickly show you, we get exactly the same answer. 9 divided by 100 times 120, 10.8 grams. Okay, so that was the second method using fractions. Now, neither of those methods are my personal favourite method. Okay, my favourite method is called the decimal method. And I want you to see, as we're working through this, can you try and decide why you think this might be my favourite method? Now, you might be aware that percentages, fractions, decimals all have an equivalence. Okay, you might have known that 28% was 28 over 100, but 28 over 100, 28 divided by 100 can also be written as a decimal, and that decimal is 0.28. So if I'm wanting to work out 28% of 35, I can turn my percentage into a decimal and just multiply by the quantity. So 0.28 times 35, I'm not going to type this one into my calculator, you can check it if you wish, would also be 9.8. Do we know what 9% is as a decimal? It's not 0.9, that would be 90%. It is 0.09. So for this one, I just do 0.09 times 120. And that would also be 10.8 grams. So, have you sussed it out? Why do I like the decimal method so much? Well, the main reason is, well, there's two reasons actually. The main reason is, decimal method, you're not actually pressing as many buttons into your calculator, which means you can get to your answers a little bit quicker, and it's a little bit less strenuous on the pinky because you're having to press less buttons. Now, the second reason perhaps is more important. I know in the topic of percentages that when we get into more complicated calculations, being able to use decimals is a lot more efficient for these harder questions. So if there's any method that I would prefer you to try and work towards, it would be the decimal method. Okay, one final thing that I just want to talk about, which always catches students out when they are using a calculator. I'm going to do a third and final question. I'm going to do it in this space here since I've got a little bit of room. And I'm going to work out 35% of £42. And it wouldn't matter which of these three methods you used on your calculator, you are going to run across the same problem. I'm going to use the decimal method. 0.35 times 42. I type that into my calculator. 0.35 times 42. 14.7. Can you see the problem? If this was an exam question, you would not get full marks. Okay, the reason why this is a problem in this question and none of the other ones is because I have used a unit of currency, in this case pounds. You could not have 14.7 pounds. Money must have two decimals. So if it's a money question and it's not two decimals, you have to put that extra decimal on the end. Okay, so that's it from me, folks. Do keep in touch. If you've got any questions with regards to the activity that I'm setting you, send me a little email. For the time being, that's me signing out, and goodbye.